Yeah. I just want to find the spill of diligence on the head. I was only coming out of there like half an hour ago. And,
As far as which is.
Oh, yeah,
But I-
well, the air quality strategy and air plan, draft air plan. So, basically what we got today, it's been in the making quite a while, and we're getting to the stage now, we're getting really close to having a strategy to go out for public consultation, and just about how we go about that is pretty much the plan for this workshop, is to decide our approach to get to where we're at to go to the next step. So we've got a head table up the end there. I'm not too sure who's going to be lead. We have Hillary, James, Fleur, and Amber. So welcome, and I'll just pass over to you guys. I think we're going to cut it in two halves pretty much, and try and get through an overview of the whole draft plan before lunch, and then dial into where we go to next in the second half. So I'll pass it over to the top table. Thank you.
Perfect. Sure, Lloyd. We have. Oh, there we go.
Sorry, James. Just before I carry on, we have an apology from Edward Ellison. He's in board meetings for his New Zealand Heritage role, and Karen Coates is also an apology, but Karen's going to join, and she's also in a board meeting in Wellington, but she's going to join us as soon as she comes through, which she hopes to be around like hours time, hopefully. So we'll just look out for her coming on screen. So thank you very much. And we're the workshop's being recorded. Thank you.
Perfect. Got it, everyone. Thank you for having us. Oh, do I have a, I'm going to be in stereo soon. There we go. As I said, thank you very much for having us. Yeah, we're here today to talk about the draft air quality strategy, which, as you say, has already had a lot of work and time and thought put into it. So we've covered a lot of the science and the reasons for doing it. So our focus today is very much going to be on the approaches that we've worked up since we last saw you in March. A couple of things before we start, a bit of housekeeping. There have been a couple of changes to the presentation that we sent you in Diligent. We ran it through yesterday, and we thought there were a couple of points where we could be clearer. So we've added one slide and a couple of small wording changes to slides that you might notice, but nothing hopefully mind-bendingly major. We've also got Simon Anderson, our lawyer, coming after lunch. So if you have any particular legal questions that you want to have addressed, we can get hold of those and ask him when he comes in, if there's anything that you're concerned about there. So our agenda today is already been laid out. Really, it's pretty straightforward. How do I advance this little fella? There we go. So we're going to run firstly through the draft air quality strategy and the approaches that we're looking at there. That, as I say, we've been over in brief earlier in the year, mainly focusing on really the hottest ticket, which is the things that we want to do around domestic heating in Otago. Then we're going to have a talk about a particular tool in that box, a very important tool, the air plan, and how we want to approach that in the current context that we've got going on, both nationally and locally. And then we'll be talking about the engagement plan. As you asked us last time, we're looking at doing some more public engagement on the draft strategy. So we'll be talking about the approach that we've looked at for doing that, and incorporated into that will be some discussion of a review of our airsheds. So a bit to cover today. So let's get moving right along. This is basically a review of where we've been so far. You can see that first touching base with you guys was in September 2023. So it's a wee while ago now, and of course things were in train before that. So we've discussed a lot of the science and the underlying issues that we have in Otago. We've talked to the public and stakeholders. We've had a survey and some early engagement, and as I say, we'll be going back to the public on the much more worked up strategy that we have at this point. And we've also had the councillor reference group. Thank you to the people in that group who have provided really valuable input on the material that we'll be putting in front of council today. So this is really the bird's eye view of what we've come up with. Obviously, there's a lot of detail that sits underneath this, but here's the top level framework, and this is really what's gluing our high level documents and our strategic directions, and what's going to eventually feed through to our work plans, at least as we've sort of drafted and put forward. So our air quality vision there, that Otago's air quality supports human health and well-being, upholds Mana Whenua values, and sustains the environment now and for generations to come. You'll see that there's some familiar wording in there that fits with our intergenerational priorities that we've got stated elsewhere, and also our sustaining the environment and broader well-being. We've got 4 outcomes listed there. Outcome 1 is around heating homes more efficiently and more clean heating, as we've said before, and we'll be discussing later on. Home heating is the big ticket item for improving air quality in Otago. So that's one of our major outcomes. And then we've got ambient air quality there as well. Localized amenity and health effects from outdoor burning are reduced. Outcome 3 focuses on agrochemical and fertilizer discharges, the more localized and generally more nationally regulated things, farming, industrial, trade, and waste emissions. And then finally, outcome 4, as you asked us earlier in the year, our focus on vehicle emissions and health effects. So that's really the shape of things. And now we're going to do a bit of a deep dive on what we call focus area 1, which will canvas in a bit. Underneath of these outcomes are a number of focus areas, and I'm going to pass over to Hilary to have a discussion of the domestic, if you just push the little arrowy thing, it goes forward. There you go, of domestic heating.
Cool, thank you. So, as James said, today we're bringing you a draft strategy, which has been worked up over quite a bit of time. The first bullet point on the slide there says that the strategy has evolved from over a decade of practical experience, but in reality, it's probably more like 2 decades. We've been doing work in this space for quite a bit of time. And we have spent more recently a bit of time working with other regional councils around the country who have actually made some great gains in this space, understanding how they did it. But we should also recognise that this is something that we have put quite a bit of effort into and made some great gains into previously in Otago. So we previously had the Warm Home Clean Heat programme, and that was born out of the 2007 Otago Regional Council Air Quality Strategy. And we buddied up with ECA, who was offering some attractive subsidies at the time for home heating improvements, and we provided a bit of a top up. And that programme ran from around about 2009 to about 2018. And through that programme, we facilitated the replacement of about half of the wood burners that at the time were said to be non-compliant. So there was that was 1,250 wood burners. So that was great. That worked really, really well, and there was air quality improvements of up to 50% in some areas. So we're basing this strategy not just on what other regions have done and what's worked in the past, but also what we've done in the past and what's worked well. So a lot of it, I'll be lying if I said I think this is going to be really easy. I don't think it's going to be easy, but it's not rocket science. It's relatively straightforward. We just have to figure out a balanced way of approaching this so that we can get on and do it. And that's what we think or believe that we've given to you today in this draft strategy. Right, so another consideration for this strategy is back in March, Council said that our ambition was going to be the NESAC, the current National Environmental Standards, which are based on particulate matter 10 microns and less, PM10. There have been conversations, I think 2018, 2019. The government signalled that they might want to review the NESAC and bring it in more line with international guidance. And then the standard would be based on a smaller particulate size, 2.5. 2.5 just being a component of 2.10. I think you already know all this already, but PM10 is particulate matter 10 and smaller, so 2.5 is a component of that. So yeah, the standards they were talking about a few years ago were going to be stricter. If the government was to bring in some stricter standards in the next couple of years, and our strategy is based on the current NESAC. You know, there might be a question of like, oh, well, did we move too fast and not wait for the new standards? But all of the interventions that ORC can make are the same as that we would described in the strategy, are the same interventions that we would be introducing anyway if it was a 2.5 standard. The only thing that's really different, or the only thing really meaningful that would be different, it would be actually phasing out wood burners completely in some towns. And we know that that's just not, there's no appetite for that right now for good reasons. So we believe that what we've provided in the strategy is a reasonably solid, not reasonably solid, but very solid, no regrets approach. We think it would be a good approach under the current standards and under signal potential future standards. Another point to make is that this strategy is very much, for focus area 1, sorry, I keep getting stuck, because focus area 1 is the one I've been really working on a lot. For focus area 1, it's very much about non-regulatory first, and then regulatory as a backup, as a last resort. It is phased because we can get into the details, we've got questions about it, but we want anyone who's got a wood burner installed to get at least 20 years of use out of that wood burner. So that's why we see a phased approach, 5-year phasing for this strategy. And for each phase, basically what we've mapped or described is 4 to 5 years of non-regulatory approaches before we do any compliance. And that's because when we spoke to other regional councils around the country who have been doing a lot of work in this space recently, they said that the key ingredients for making these things work, there was kind of 4 key ingredients. One was time. You need to give people time to make changes. One was, education, awareness, advice. They did say that funding was a key ingredient if you actually want to make change, and they said that you do need a regulatory backstop. So that's why we've got a phased approach. It is reasonably, I want to say gentle, but we're talking about 4 or 5 years of non-regulatory before we do any regulation. And we believe that it balances compassion and compliance. So it's not just about rules. It's really about helping people to heat their homes more cleanly and more efficiently. And yeah, I've touched on is that it takes approaches that have been proven to be successful in other parts of New Zealand, and also that have actually worked really well in Otago in the past. And throughout regional council's perspective, we heard from Councillor Malcolm yesterday, mentioned that we, as a regional council, we need to get better, or we provide more visibility of the outcomes that we're delivering. And this is an area where we can really do that. We're going to say it's not going to be easy, but it is reasonably straightforward. And so, here's my inspiring slide to take away, is that if we did this, we might have a headline like this in 10 to 20 years time. But this is what we could be looking at. So I encourage you today to think about bigger picture, longer term. This is what Rotorua achieved. They got on about, was it 10 or 15 years ago they started? Yeah. 10 to 15 years ago, they developed a strategy and they got on and they implemented it. And 15 years later, they're getting headlines like this now. Appreciate that Rotorua's situation is different to Otago, especially Central Otago. But that's why we have adapted our strategy for the Central Otago context, or the Otago context, sorry. I've already touched on this. I'm really honing in on focus area 1 right now. And so you've all seen the materials. Just to as a reminder, focus area 1 is domestic heating in the 6 priority towns. So it's the current Air Zone 1 towns plus Milton and Mossgiel, which we think should actually be part of Air Zone 1 as well. And this is just a reminder that to do this well, you need a toolkit that brings in all sorts of different tools. Okay, so we've in the toolkit that we've got articulated in the strategy, we've got the first stage of getting a better understanding about who's using what, where, and why. Some education and raising awareness. Well, actually, lots of education and lots of raising awareness. We need to talk at some point about supporting people financially through this. There's different options which it's touched on in the strategy, but we can talk a little bit more like that today because Nick's here. Providing in-home assessments, so it's not just about telling people, you know, go and get a new wood burner or go and get a heat pump. It's actually supporting existing service providers in the community who actually work one-on-one with homeowners and occupiers to understand the, you know, the full wraparound package that people might need. We've also looked at getting in introducing a good wood scheme, and I know this was a particular favourite for Councillor Kelleher, and it's worked well in other regions to varying degrees of success. In some regions where they've done it quite comprehensively, they've had really good results. Other regions where they kind of did a bit of a half job and they got a bit half the results. So we think that we could do it here and we should probably have a good go at it. And then another tool in the box is the regulation. So there's Air Zone 1, we have talked about phase out rules that would commence in 2030. And what I wanted to just articulate with this slide is that we think that we need all of these tools in the toolbox. If we want to take one of those tools out, or we think that one of those tools shouldn't be used, then we're going to have to lean a lot more heavily on some of the other tools if we actually want to make the gains that we've said that we want to make. So, for example, if we took the rules out, the regulation, that backstop, then we might have to lean more on things like financial incentives. So that could get quite expensive. If we wanted to take out financial incentives, then we might have to go a bit more heavy-handed with regulation. Yeah. So that's why we've tried to provide quite a balanced approach that uses a little bit of everything, and it's not particularly heavy-handed with any. So just back to that phased approach, this is described in the strategy, but just talk through the steps. So first of all is we need to gain a better understanding of who's using what, where and why. And we have current modelling estimates, we've got building consent data, we've got an idea about what types of solar fuel burners are in the different towns around the region. But I think we would benefit greatly from a more granular level of understanding. For example, how many of those wood burners are of a certain age, how many of them are in rental properties, how many of them are in lower socioeconomic areas, that sort of thing. So before we rush ahead too far with some of our solutions, like you know, funding solutions and things like that, I think that we would benefit greatly from just taking, you know, maybe the next 12 months to just gain a better understanding. What we're envisaging is like a GIS platform or GIS layer that we can identify, okay, you know, where are all the wood burners? What are the situations for those people? How can we help? And where we've identified that households would benefit from a visit from an in-home assessment team, we would try and make the connections with those service providers. We're not proposing that ORC staff would go out and do the in-home assessments. There's already numerous service providers in the community, and so it's about working with them and supporting them. You know, we've heard from some providers that they've got the money, they want to help the people, they just want to know where the people are. And so we can help with that through our better understanding about who's using what, where and why, and what different people's situation is. There is existing funding out there currently, but we do think that over the next 12 months we could start to get a better handle on what some sort of ORC support might look like, and we'll get into that later. And you know, we would carry on with that for 4 or 5 years, really helping people to make improvements so that by 2030, ideally, if we do this really well, by 2030, there'll be no pre-2010 solid fuel burners left in those 6 towns. That's ambition. However, if there are those pre-2010 wood burners left, you know, the homeowner occupier, for whatever reason, has not taken up not all of the support and guidance and everything else that we've offered, then we do need a regulatory backstop. appreciate, and that's going to have to be treated very carefully, case by case basis. Because for some people it's just not practical, feasible, but until we actually get out there and get a better understanding about what's going on and who's using what, where and why, I don't think we can assume that we can categorize any people right now with really that deeper understanding. And so then that cycle of basically 4 or 5 years of non-regulatory approach, followed by a regulatory backstop, would be continued at 5-yearly intervals until we're convinced that in the 6 priority towns, we've got no solid fuel burners left in use unless they are ULEB standard or higher. So just on the costs side of things, so a couple of questions. So if we wanted to crack on and start doing this now, how much can we do under the existing LTP versus how much would we need to look at resourcing in a future LTP? We think that most of the actions that we've identified for the next couple of years can be undertaken business as usual. You might need a little bit of shuffling of work programs, but we're not asking for any more FTE or any more money right now, just to get this thing started. The compliance team for the focus area 1, we're not anticipating that they would have to do anything until 2030, so they were quite happy when we told them that. It would just be business as usual for them in the air quality space. When it gets to the next LTP, like we said, one of the tools in the box of the environmental support, we would spend the next year figuring out what that should look like or could look like, and then that would be a decision for the next LTP. We're not asking anyone to make a decision on that today. The strategy starts to describe a couple of different options. So, for example, we've looked at a voluntary targeted rate scheme, which is where the homeowner takes essentially you shouldn't call it a loan because it's not a loan, it's rate, but they take, we give them ORC gives them an advance of $6,000. We picked $6,000 because for a straightforward replacement of a solid fuel burner with the ULEB, for a straightforward replacement, $6,000 would cover it. So, for example, if people were to take an advance from ORC of $6,000 and then pay that back over their rates over 10 years. So that's a voluntary targeted rate scheme. So understandably, some people's rates would double for 10 years. And so we're just going to take that into consideration. But there is a gap in the market right now for a low interest, easy to access loan for replacing a wood burner with a wood burner. So you can get these green loans from the banks. I'm sure you heard of those. The 4 big banks are offering green loans for home improvements and things, and their interest rates are quite attractive for the first couple of years at least. But for 3 of the 4 banks, you can only take out one of these green loans if you're replacing your wood burner with a heat pump, because they want to see ultimate outcomes. They're not interested with a higher emitting wood burner with a lower emitting burner. It has to be a heat pump. So it's only if you're with ASB can you get one of these green loans to replace a wood burner with a wood burner. So there is a gap in the market for a low interest one for replacing a wood burner with a wood burner. Another thing that we've done in the past that worked well was grants. One-way transaction. It's a bit more straightforward. We don't have to administer this thing for payback over 10 years, but it's more expensive. We may, as we go through the system, better understanding about who's using what, where and why and what's going to work. We might come back to you with a suggested bit more nuanced approach. We might say, well, for these communities who are in this socioeconomic bracket, to make this work, it's going to have to be a grant, or and for these sorts of communities or people in this sort of situation, it might be a voluntary targeted rate scheme. We could also look at different things like if you're going to replace your wood burner with a wood burner, it's a voluntary targeted rate scheme and it's this sort of interest. If you're going to replace your wood burner with a heat pump, the the terms of the loaning are more attractive, so a way of incentivizing wood burners to heat pumps where possible. Appreciating that's not possible for everywhere. And I'm just cautious of not talking too much about funding stuff
Oh.
without Nick, give me a nod.
Before you go, I think we got a question here from Kate.
Apologies, you may have put this, Rodeo had to take a call. Gas is actually used a lot and it is going to. Where did the funding sit with going from gas to wood or gas to heat pump? Because the gas, for similar reasons, not air but they are used a lot in those, in some of those areas, and their costs are going to, and the access to gas may become more problematic. What we don't want is them in the short term from gas to the wrong sort of wood. And so, and whether those schemes, yeah, does that make sense?
So from memory, the green loans from the banks, it's if you're electrifying your home, because it's a green loan, so they're not really supporting people installing gas.
No, yeah. No, but can you convert from gas? Yeah, because at the moment, there's a lot of gas there because of those issues, but the gas is becoming more problematic. So it's a gas conversion to what is it provided for?
Sure.
Oh, I'm not sure I can answer the gas conversion to what, but from personal experience, just using a green loan, it's about the installation of the heat pump. It's not about replacement as such, which is what our focus would obviously be on replacement. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Answer.
I think there's a space there that's becoming more of a concern than it was even when I raised this some time ago, that because of where the gas fields and gas supplies going.
Yeah, the can't speak to the green loans, but what we were thinking with these potential schemes as part of their strategy would be focused on wood burner replacements. It wouldn't be about helping, because the focus of the strategy is human health. Or we wouldn't be helping people to convert from gas to something else. It's wood burner replacements.
I'll just jump in for this because I've discussed this with Nick at length, because we have had a request for a while just to have a look at potential funding options, not just for air, but for other things like septic. It's a reasonably complicated space and we've got to be very careful how we approach it. So for example, if we go down the route of providing loans with an element of interest, that is very complicated and has a significant impact on Nick and the team in terms of administering an interest-bearing loan of any sort, and you are highly unlikely to get a recommendation from staff that that's the direction you should go down. Interest-free is different, or a straight grant. The other thing, though, that we do know through meetings with the trusts, and Hilary made mention of this, there are groups around with money to invest in these areas that just need to be connected. It doesn't all need to fall to the council, but we have some tools that might help. So I think through the discussions we've had at ELT and where I know the strategy is going, the direction around whether we want to get into the space or not is probably the critical thing. And then there's a significant amount of work to do for us to bring back good, robust advice to you around what the pros and cons of each of these options are and what the different methods that we could approach this. But it's a complicated space and Nick can go into it if he wants to, but as soon as you start looking to apply interest and stuff to things, my view is we're wasting our time, or we would spend so much time and effort trying to administer that. It's just not worth it for the benefit that we get. We're better off to either give some money out or do it as an interest-free loan with a targeted rate, as a voluntary targeted rate, as Hilary discussed. So we need to bring all that back. Because obviously it does come at a cost and it depends on how many people take up the loans. Really what we need to understand is, as far as is it an area that the council is keen for us to get into, because what the team are telling us is that it is one of the mechanisms one of the levers we will need to pull if we're to make some progress.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, but looking at that under your figures from page 12, page 10 and 12, you're looking at if you go down the grant line, the grant line, I would say would be taking out quite quickly. There's at least a potential of 3,500 fires that need to be replaced in that on your estimates at the moment, which is $21 million. And if you put that on if you just put it on a non-interest bearing loan, that's going to cost, it's going to be $500,000 worth of rates every year over a 10-year period. So there's reasonable chunks of money involved in that, because the grant, I'd certainly think people would jump at the grant even instead of a green loan, probably.
I'd suggest if we're offering to give out money to replace a fire, we'll have lots of people queuing up.
That's right. Yeah. But I mean, that's one of that's the options put in.
Yeah.
The two options put in there is either but the other option would be, that's not mentioned there, would be actually having the scheme that could be paid off through rates, but funded through a bank through a reverse mortgage or something.
And look,
That would be given, that we would only act as the conduit to it, that we wouldn't actually have to touch the financial part of it. That would make that an available option through either a green loan or something through someone else. Yeah.
I think those questions, or we need direction on that, like here, or that's something that can, that's like what's being highlighted, that having funding sources for conversions of fires is something that may be needed, but the actual how we go about doing it is probably not required right at this stage.
Yep, correct. Like Richard said, we've got a bit of work to do to figure out what the best approach to that would be. But I think, today what we're looking for is an direction on the strategy, and the strategy says that Owasi will work on funding financing kind of approach or option for people. I'm keen to open the floor for questions just on that focus area 1 before we move on. Just to another point, something I just wanted to raise awareness of. I've handed out a flyer there from Massport. So we've had some really interesting chats with wood burner suppliers. We went to Robbie down at the Dunedin Fireplace down here. He sells 3,000 wood burners a year. And he told us that the two biggest retailers for suppliers of firewood wood burners in New Zealand right now are Massport and Metro. Massport are transitioning, and I actually talked to Massport directly as well just recently. Massport are transitioning all of their range to ULEB now. So that handout there is their current range, so half of them are ULEBs, and they have the same heat output as non-ULEB. One of the reasons why Massport is transitioning their whole range to ULEB is because places like Canterbury introduced rules, and other parts of New Zealand introduced rules saying that ULEB is the only option or the only way to go. So there's an example there of the regulation driving the market. And so, over time, I think we're going to see it's harder and harder to buy a wood burner that's not ULEB. But we have ambitions to improve air quality in our towns a bit quicker than that. So I think the point I just want to make is that ULEBs, when we had the previous strategy back in 2007, there wasn't such thing as a ULEB. But now they are price comparable to other wood burners. That's what Robbie told us. I've got a ULEB at home. I've also got a potbelly in my shed, so I can speak about using both of them, but we don't need to get into that sort of detail. It was just there.
Contraband.
Yeah, I know. It's on 3. But yeah, I think it's just a good time to stop, pause, and have a chat about focus area 1 and see how people feel about it.
Andrew?
So the question about the ULED options from Eka Warming, what they call themselves, Warming Kiwi Homes. If those ULED and pellet burners were second hand, would they still be eligible for the grant? Now, why I ask the question is at a Cozy Homes Hui, Alan I think was there as well, the guy that sells pellet burners in Dunedin. Sorry, I can't remember his
Yes,
name.
Q.
Scare, yeah, it's Sea or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
Green
So
Islands.
he gets a heap of secondhand pellet burners. So that was why I asked the question.
Nigel.
Not thinking.
Would have to ask.
Doesn't need to know it today,
Yeah.
but you know, just it'd be useful to know.
Yeah, no, we'd have to ask them. I don't know if there'd be many secondhand ULEBs out there right now, but there might be pellet fires, but we'd have to ask them.
Thank you.
Just wanted to check, are you confident you've got the time to gather the required information and put proposals together in time for consideration for the next long-term plan? Because clearly if there are funding proposals, really does need to give for that. We've got enough time for that.
Yeah, we've currently got James on loan from the strategy team, and I haven't told Fleur that yet that she's not getting him back. No, we've got a there's been quite a few of us working on this, and we've made some great gains already, but we already have data about what wood burners weigh, because we receive building consent data monthly, I think, yeah, from BCI, where they are. So we have the data. The first step is putting it all into a GIS layer. So we have the address, and that goes back 25 years. So we already have the data that shows which wood burners have been installed in which properties over the last 25 years. If there is no record of a wood burner being installed in the last 25 years and the property has a chimney, then we can assume that either it's older than 25 years, or they didn't get a building consent, or it's one that's fallen through the cracks, or they might have one that they just don't use. That's fine. And we would need to engage directly with those homeowners. That's going to take a bit of time. The first stage of getting all of the map together, that's not going to be too long.
Or I still believe in Santa Claus.
We're talking to the GIS team. They said they can do some pretty cool stuff with computer learning as well, just to quickly scan an area and go like, where's the properties with chimneys? The ones that don't have chimneys, we assume that they have something else, so we don't need to talk to them.
So do you have any idea how many open fireplaces there are?
Yeah, in the 6 priority towns, I'd have to go and get that data. Not as many as in Dunedin.
Yeah, there's a lot of old homes.
Yeah, we're talking about the 6 priority towns though. I'd say there's a lot less in Blyden, well, might be some Clyde, Cromwell, Alexandra.
Through the Cozy Home Initiative that's been going on for a number of years, that are you in contact with them, and can you get the information from them? Because there could still be houses with chimneys that have in fact been upgraded to possibly to electric.
Yeah, we've been chatting a lot. So they're called Target Housing Alliance now. We've been working with them a lot. I don't know if they have that sort of data, but we've been talking to ECA. We know ECA's got a heap of data about upgrades and things that have been ECA provided all the data of all of the grants that they've provided in the last 20 odd years for replacement. So we've got data from there as well. And Wakaha, they are one of the main kind of in-home assessment teams. So, working with all these different agencies, I think we can build a bit of a picture and fill some gaps.
So where does the just thinking on that, where does the responsibility then sit between ORC and then the TAs that are actually controlling everything of these fires that go in and all that? So what data can we just get straight from them? I know you can get, surely, I'm just seeing a double up.
But the building consent, the building consent data that we get from BCI comes straight from the TAs.
Right.
And so we've talked to the TAs about, because the quality of the data that we get depends on the quality of the data that they input. So, we have an obligation to manage air quality. They have an obligation to meet the building code or ensure that the properties meet the building code. When someone applies for a building consent, they can signal to the property owner that this sort of wood burner is compliant with ORC's rules. But my understanding is they can't actually withhold a building consent if the property owner decides to put in something that's not compliant with our rules.
Big gap in that.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so they can provide and you know, interesting when we applied for our building consent recently, DCC pushed the ORC stormwater wastewater regulations quite heavily on us. You know, made sure go measure 50 meters from the creek and everything, which I was going to do anyway. You know, so they were quite good at pushing ORC's rules, but my understanding is that if I had decided to put my wastewater field within 50 meters of the creek, they can't actually withhold they can't not sign off the building consent. But they can strongly advise people and they can tell people, you know, you can go and spend $3,000 on this wood burner, but it's going to be non-compliant with ORC's rules, and so you might have to rip it out if ORC find out.
So how is that? So on a new subdivision, and I think that's, Lex has often mentioned that about Arrowtown and the like, so I could put a new subdivision in one of those 6 towns in Milton and put all open fires in, and I would get a building consent, but it could be in complete contravention to our air plan, and we've got no way of stopping that happening. Is that what it's, so even if we adopt a new air plan, so you're saying I can go and put a fast track thing that really annoyed Elliot going through quickly, and we could have, you know, 300. I know this won't happen, but it could happen. That we've got no control over what they put in.
We are proposing, you know, it's not just about phasing out older wood burners. We want to bring in a rule that basically says that any new installation needs to be a ULEB. So we'll be clear that that is ORC's rules, as any new installation needs to be a ULEB. If we are not, if the TA is not aware of that or doesn't give us a heads up, then things might slip through the cracks, but that's where we want to work closely with our TAs. I think legally wise, and this might be a question for the lawyer this afternoon, I think legally wise, it's, I don't know if the legal backstop is there, but you know, we have the ability to go out and undertake compliance if we know that 300 open fires have been put in.
So a TA doesn't have to give effect to the RRC plan.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, what's the law? Are we actually doing it then?
Well, we can give effect to our plan. If we knew there was a subdivision going with 300 houses and we knew that they were putting in fires that were not compliant, I suggest a quick phone call to the developer to say all of your purchases are going to be slapped with an abatement notice since they can't use their fires would change their tune pretty quickly. So we can still give effect to it. It would be better to have the tools through the legislation.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
The certificates are really good tools because they just stop a building consent in its tracks until the right resource consent has been issued.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a gap. Kirsten will be familiar with it as well because it's part of the consenting process. So there's a couple of questions to be asked, but it's a little bit of a gap. It doesn't stop us giving effect to our plans. It's just it would be the most valuable tool for us because it would stop it before it happened.
Yeah,
That's the difference.
yeah, and that's what I'm saying is if we go ahead, and I'm happy where we're going. I'm not against what we're doing, but surely that's the part that we need to fix before we start causing angst within communities that we've been given a TA rule that says I can do this, and now you're telling me I can't. If you're not, so how do we? Yeah, what's the mechanism to start that getting sorted? Because that's probably one of these things that needs to be sorted.
It's MB, it's the building act.
Yeah, we'll have to get some legal advice on that, but it's a national thing. It's not a. I don't think that's something we could solve at this level.
What we can do.
It's lobby.
Yeah. What we can do is what we do already, really, which is talking to the building consents departments, and they're all at the moment. They've got a flow chart of our rules, and they go through that with anyone who's applying for a consent. And so, if we're clear with our rules and we keep in contact with the building consents people, they will let everybody know who's applying to put a fire in and get a building consent for one. These are your risks, and then it's sort of up to the up to the individual. I know for me, if I said, I want this fire and the TA said, great, you're not going to be able to light it, I'd probably make another decision. So it's that, and that's what we're saying about the soft side of all this that we're trying to lead with, is making sure that all that information is out there, that it's clear and that it's available through multiple channels, so people get to know it and are aware of it.
So sorry, Lloyd, and so that's why you've got back further, allowed in each town and help building consent officers share the information, because we've actually got no teeth. I know we can, as an enforcement, once we've got our plan and we can enforce it, but it's after the fact, and which is a bit, it's not good, is it?
It's daft, but
No.
we don't have control on that particular bit.
We also want to work with the retailers. You know, I went into Mitre 10 the other day and walked around and saw all these wood burners, and to me it wasn't obvious about what was allowed where, you know, on the front of the wood burner. If you talk to Massport directly, they're great, you know.
Yeah.
But I think that you know, we would love to get into, you know, Mitre 10s and New Bunnings, and Robbie down the fireplace, he's gonna champion this for us. You know, we can get into these stores and ask them to provide better guidance and information to help people make good decisions, because we don't want people spending $4,000 or whatever on a wood burner that a couple of years time they find out that they can't use. So yeah, you're right, there is we don't have that. The building consent authorities can't do it for us, but they can definitely promote it for us.
At this stage.
But as Hilary said, we'll test it with some legal advice.
Yeah. Thank you. Yep.
And I just wondering whether you've spoken to some of the names like Ryan Canby, other people in this situation, how they approach that gap as well, would be quite interesting.
Yeah, there's worked a lot with the retailers. The other thing they've done is work with, who was it that went around all of the estate agents? Is that normal?
That was
Very plenty, yeah. Went around all of the estate agents, provided advice to them, both in terms of on selling a property, but also for rentals. You know, the estate agents who are managing rental properties and things like that. So it's getting out there and having the conversations and building those relationships with the people who are front facing, the people who homeowners engage with when they're looking to install a wood burner. Because we can't be there the whole time, so the building consent authorities, your retailers, things like that. Chimney sweeps, you know, we had a chimney sweep last year, and they handed out some leaflets about, you know, looking after your wood burner better, and you know, we could ask with the chimney sweeps to provide a bit more guidance in the leaflets that they handed out. There's lots of points of contact out there between us and the people who are installing wood burners. There's lots of other points of contact that we can work with.
I think Andrew's got a question, I think.
Just going back to the availability of assistance currently, would it be useful for the purposes of consultation to actually have a flow chart that basically starts off, you know, is your burner compliant, yes or no? And then it drops down to, you know, the options that you've got to, you know, secure funding. So it stimulates some conversations and feedback about what would be potentially desirable, because, you know, we hear some sort of mechanism that's, you know, involves grants, loans and interest, bloody complicated, difficult to administer or costly to administer. But if we looked at what actually exists to help to stimulate that sort of feedback may be useful, because there's probably a hell of a lot that can be done without this authority stepping into that space.
I mean, a lot of that's described in words in the strategy, but we could try and put it into a diagram.
Yeah, there's lots of options that you mentioned in there that, yeah, if you can actually just lots of options that'll be mentioned in there, but if you could break that down so people can quite easily understand what potentially could be an option for them.
Yeah. Something else that we would like to do as well, as part of the engagement, is a interactive map. Because if we're going to be adjusting the Air Zone 1 boundaries, it's described in there, Air Zone 1, Air Zone 2. Air Zone 1, just adjusting the boundaries of existing Air Zone 1 towns to allow for current and projected urban growth, and also to bring Milton and Mosgiel into Air Zone 1, and then Air Zone 2, there's some tweaking of boundaries as well, and there's some bringing some new towns in. So an interactive map where you can click on it and you can see what Air Zone you're currently in, what Air Zone will you be in if the strategy is implemented, that sort of thing too.
Thanks. Sorry, I've got a question that's around the timeline. And I just feel pretty conscious that we're sitting here, well advanced in 2025, and to get to where we have a plan that's functional and operating, it's going to be like next year at some stage. And your first target is your pre-210 burners, and it doesn't seem like a lot of time because it's all new, because there's going to be a big group of pre-210, and then the next tranche is only like 5-year tranches going out. So your biggest lump is going to be your initial lump. And you sort of said that, and if you look at your timeline, it's all the education stuff's all going to happen in like 12-month period. But
You're going to have 3 years on it.
to get going, you haven't got a lot of time to actually get the word out there across all those people, and because that'll stimulate the interest for the next group as well. But it's just the initial one. It's just whether we got enough time to get that information out there, that education going, without any extra resource.
We've already got quite a few things going on out there, starting to raise more awareness in some of these communities. So we've got there are projects underway that are led by us and some that we are supporting or just aware of. So there's, for example, we commissioned an outdoor burning study between Alexandra and Clyde, so that's underway now. And as part of that, the consultant who's doing that has engaged with 20 odd properties. When did we put out? Yeah, a bunch of properties between Alexandra and Clyde. So just getting people to put little air monitors on their properties and just think about air quality and in relation to outdoor burning. That same consultant is doing their own private work with some schools and Clyde and maybe Alexandra as well, just about indoor air quality. The same consultant who was previously at NIWA has done a bunch of kind of citizen science projects in Arrowtown and then in Milton previously as well. So there's already people out there raising awareness. Aroha Kaikorai Valley are a community group. They're starting to raise awareness of air quality, because now you've got these little air quality meters that they're not adequate for monitoring under the NESAC. But if you want to just start to engage people and make them more aware and just start to think about the connection between what they're breathing in and wood burners and things, these little meters now are more affordable. And so as part of the education piece, it's not just doing our usual thing of Facebook posts and posters around the place. It's actually some citizen science. We could look at some kind of more community forums and things. There's a couple of different ideas that we're working on. The next 12 months was really focused on the database of wood burners and developing some ideas for funding models. The education advice guidance piece is already underway. It's been happening for a while. It would continue. We want to bolster it. We want to ramp up the Burn Dry Breathe Easy campaign. We want to do all of that. So it's and that would continue indefinitely. It's not just a 12-month thing.
So this goes out to consultation, and then we would have an option of changing that timeframe if, on your advice, and we got a feeling that we needed to slip another year into that first tranche.
Yeah.
I'm not looking to change it now, but I mean, so that's still an option for us, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just wanting to drill into the one page or one of the focus areas around supporting working with tenancy services around rental properties, and it was just for the Air Zone 1, but I think I'm curious how we think about addressing whether it's healthy homes compliance or any other factors that might be leading to burning of non-ULEV burners in those properties. Where there are landlords who are reluctant to actually install those, or at least aren't taking the initiative, but there are tenants who are keen for their burner to be upgraded to an ultra low emissions one, or to have a heat pump, a better heat pump installed, or even just meet Healthy Homes compliance or any of those things. Are there any ways we can empower tenants as well to take that initiative or support them in getting some of those changes through if landlords are reluctant?
Sure, yeah, what we've spoken with the tenancy folks, one thing that we know is that Healthy Homes, if we implemented a standard for burners, the Healthy Homes standard would incorporate that, not through the standards themselves, but through the Act. The landlords, they're obliged to have a forget the exact term, but an operational heat source, I think they call it. Something close to that. Can you remember the technical term? Qualifying heat source. And that includes something that is in accordance with local regulations. So they would actually be required to have one of those in their homes. The question is how you sort of find out about that and how you arbitrate any arguments between tenants and landlords. And so we're thinking about how we can interact with tenancy services and how tenancy services can coordinate their checks so that there's less of that sort of animosity towards tenants specifically.
Yeah, it's something you have to tread really, really carefully with, because what we don't want is to end up in 2030 in a situation where we've got a tenant who receives an abatement notice from ORC to stop using wood burner, and they don't have any other heat source. So we want to tread really, really carefully. Also, we've heard from Otago Housing Alliance that tenants are already living in homes that don't meet Healthy Home standards, but some of them can be very cautious to stop in their landlords because they don't want to get evicted or blacklisted. So it's a very much a gently tread carefully kind of approach. But even if we just raise awareness for landlords that, oh, by the way, did you know when these new rules come in, you're not going to meet Healthy Home standards? Oh, by the way, here's this funding that's available through other parties and or I'll say here's some support and advice you can get. So we want to take landlords on the same journey as well and give them lots of opportunity, so that they don't end up non-compliant.
Yeah, with chairs and relevance, just as an example, I know someone that's called them Council Weir because they might have recently moved into a new flat. And that was not provided with the Healthy Homes compliance statement that they're meant to have by July 1st, so less than a week away, and without a electric burner in the living room where it's supposed to be a solid fuel burner. That's definitely not a ultra low emissions burner. It's not an air zone one, obviously, but it is also completely lacking in insulation around the Healthy Homes compliance stuff. But as you mentioned, to actually get enforcement of that is a very difficult thing, and I think most tenants are either don't have the information or are unwilling to take on the landlord because they don't want to get kicked out of their property or face retaliation. And so I'm wondering if there is a role. I know MB sent some inspectors to some properties around North Dunedin recently and found all kinds of compliance lacking, but that doesn't feel like a very structure. Yeah, that was sort of a one-off. And I'm wondering if there are ways we can help.
Councillor Weir,
For me.
to help Councillor Weir.
Because
why?
keep me cold.
That is tenancy services role to do that, and I guess our position would be how strongly can we encourage tenancy services to get out there and and intervene in those cases, because tenancy services does have a role in those cases where tenants are feeling like they don't want to take on their landlord or have a fear of that, which can be quite reasonable. Tenancy services can help that happen. And I think the system that you're talking about, where tenancy services goes out and does random checks, is actually quite a useful way of getting around that problem, because if you get caught in a random check, you're caught in a random check, and perhaps there is some interface that we could have with them once we have burner standards in place that could support that.
What we don't want to do is provide a list to tenancy services and say these are naughty landlords who have got non-compliant burners. I think we want to work with landlords first. We want to work with them first and give them all the support and advice that we're going to give to anyone else, because they're a property owner like anyone else.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if maybe we might consider putting out more public information to help tenants be informed, because in the example I've got before, the property management company gave false information about the Healthy Homes compliance, and that had to be sort of rectified by looking through all of the technical information on the tenancy services. And so if we were providing information about, we have this requirement for Air Zone 1, make sure your tenancy agreement has that, or your Healthy Homes compliance has that, or whatever. That would be honestly. So
A wee bit off task. We've had pretty good discussion. We need to try and move on, but I've got three more. I've got Gary, Kate, and Kevin. Gary and Kevin got a question. Might wrap this sort of part up and move on to the next bit.
Yes, well, I think we've had a lot of discussion so far on wood burners, but to me, we're actually lacking the key point of it, which is good wood. And I'm just curious as to, obviously there's some activity underway with assessing burners and looking at what's in the tin and what the retailers are doing. What are we doing when it comes to good wood?
Well, that's the way other places have addressed that, is through what they call a good wood scheme, or various other names for them, where it's in the strategy, but basically where the council has established a memorandum of understanding with various retailers around the region, and the council provides advertising on the website and some signage for the retailers, and the retailers in return say we will provide, and well, there are various ways that it's done, but generally speaking, the retailer says we'll provide dry wood, we'll promise that it's dry. If we can't provide dry wood, we say that it is wet when we deliver it, and they undertake to have like certain standards of storage and to try and get stock on hand. I've spoken to a couple of retailers, and it sounds like the whole industry has some difficulties at the moment just with getting hold of enough stock, just because of who's buying what. They're competing with folks who are chipping wood for wood chip burners. So there's a raft of issues there, but generally speaking, there's that agreement and that certification with certain wood suppliers. And the retailers that I've spoken to are really aware of the importance of providing dry wood. One of the other issues that they run into is that the market obviously has a whole lot of other people in it, small sellers on Facebook, who don't necessarily hold to the same level that they do, and the bigger retailers are, the indications that I've heard, are that they would be quite keen to have some form of certification in place that gave them a point of difference in the market. What other councils do too is they have an auditing regime. ECAN does this, has an auditing regime around their wood sellers, where they go out and test the wood that's on sale a couple of times a year, and they have a quite comprehensive website that details who those retailers are and also puts advice out there to the public about the importance of dry wood. So it's those two prongs, going through the retailers and having that agreement, but also increasing the availability of information and targeted education to the public in general about what they should be looking for.
So just further to that, so something that other regions have done as well is they have basically smoky chimney monitors. So they have people driving around looking for chimneys discharging a lot of smoke, and then they engage with the homeowner and then try and support the homeowner to use that wood burner better. It's had mixed reactions in different places. Some people think it's great, other people feel like being spied on. What the science is showing us, however, is that for these priority towns, these 6 towns, even if everybody had a wood burner that is compliant under the current rules, so 1.7 grams per kilogram of particulate, even if everyone had a compliant solid fuel burner and they were using it to its optimum standard, or as highest performance, which is 1.7, it still wouldn't, we wouldn't get the air quality outcomes that we want. So with these wood burners, remember, you know, your levels are 1.4 or less. The current standard is for the 4 Central Otago towns is 1.7.
Yeah.
MFE for other burners is 1.5. That's if you're using it the best you can. Okay, so what we've said is, or what we've identified is that we looked at one point of going like, well, how about we just don't change the rules, we just make sure everyone's compliant with our current rules. But I think that's quite a short-sighted approach, because even if everyone had a burner that was compliant with our current rules, we wouldn't meet NESAC. Even if they had a compliant burner and they're using it to the best standards, we wouldn't have NESAC. So that's where we went, right, well, rather than starting to do this chimney monitor thing, how about we just get on and spend our time, energy, resources on what needs to happen, which is we actually just need to start phasing out the older, higher emitting wood burners. Because if you've got a higher emitting wood burner, even if you have the cleanest wood, cleanest, driest wood, and you're using it to, you know, loads of kindling and everything, you still can only achieve a certain level of emissions reduction. So you're never going to get 1.4 with an older wood burner.
And it goes back to what you were saying at the very beginning, that this is a suite of tools that works together. It's sort of, we haven't set it up as either or, we've set it up as both and, basically. That you need the good burner and you need the good wood in the good burner.
Yes.
To make, yeah.
And we can achieve the good burners over a long period of time, because we don't want people caught up in having invested recently and then, yeah, that's all understandable. But the good wood element we can achieve very quickly.
Yep, and it's one of the tools in the box, and we want to crack on and get it underway as soon as we can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Kevin, you still got a question? Are you happy?
No, that's all right. No.
Awesome. No, really good discussions, and yeah, we'll carry on and go through the next 6 priority areas.
Yeah, so this is going to be a bit less of a deep dive. We're going to go through these areas relatively quickly, but I could say overall that approach of the whole tool set working together goes through all of this, as well as that approach of having, I guess you'd say, quite diffuse ways of getting in, working with lots of partners, having lots of different ways into an issue is what's going to help us resolve what's going on. So our focus area 2, domestic heating, air zones 2, it's a little bit of a misnomer, because, well, not a misnomer, but it applies in air zone 1 as well. It's basically all urban areas, and that's saying that going forward, if you're going to put a burner in, it's going to need to be a ULEB. And that goes hand in hand with those other tools like the Goodwood program, with education and with adjusting the air zones. And that means that the standards are fair across the board, but it also means that we hold the line in those places that do have good air quality already as those places expand. And so focus area 3 is and I'm perhaps wrap 3 and 4 together a little bit, 3 is urban outdoor burning, so that's within those urban areas, what people are doing out of doors, and that can involve a range of approaches. And we just want to be clearer on what can be done and where, expanding the prohibited items list, like making sure that people are burning the right sorts of things in their burners, sort of none of that burning of waste out in your backyard, which I hope not too many people are doing anyway. And again, providing education about what it's reasonable to burn, and a record of notified burns, and that sort of slides into that outdoor burning area. We know that even in those urban spaces, we do have some bigger properties out on the rural fringe, those lifestyle properties, and some of them are big enough to do the sort of larger scale outdoor burning. We want to make sure that that's done properly as well. And that, as I say, sort of melds into that air zone 3 area, which is getting out into the rural area proper, where people are burning for those more rural purposes, to get rid of waste, for horticulturists to get rid of diseased material, to do those land clearance burns. And as we've mentioned earlier, we're pretty keen to get baleage wrap off the list of things that can be burned. We think that there are more reasonable options out there now for managing that, with waste companies out there dealing with recycling. And we're really interested in getting some more proactive education out there, again, using what panels and relationships we have with industry groups and with community groups to spread information about what good burning practice looks like. We've got some of that information, perhaps it's a bit long in the tooth now, in our current air plan. There was, back in the mists of time, a high country burning guideline that was actually community led. We're quite interested in going out to the rural community and updating or creating a new set of such guidelines. And I think through the process of doing something like that, we will get communities together and talking about what good burning practice looks like, and just the value of that conversation happening, I think, is quite high, but also coming out of that with a guideline that isn't just generated from council itself, but is actually generated by those communities and their peers. I think that will have a stronger effect on good burning practice, and people making sure that good practice is spread. We're also, and among that, looking at providing a record of notified burns, to whether it's worth notifying to council when big burns are underway. And this is something that FENZ already notes to some extent, and this has sort of two prongs to it, I suppose. One is making sure that we know what's going on for our own sort of pollution management purposes. So if somebody a member of the public is ringing us up and saying, "Oh, I can see a burn out there, is that a problem?" that we already know about it, so we're able to manage that a bit more easily. But also so that we can promulgate that information to the public and share with the public information about those burns that are required, and get perhaps a little bit more awareness among the urban public, who perhaps aren't quite so aware of what needs are for rural burning, that they have some more awareness about what's okay and what's not okay, so they're not phoning in things that are actually appropriate, if that makes sense. Buffer zones,
Can I do
yes.
that?
Yeah, go for it.
Also for Air Zone 3, so something that we've talked to the ASV committee about previously was introducing buffer zones. And so this was something that sparked a bit of conversation. So other councils some of the councils have done this, and they vary in what they look like. But I think some maps were brought previously to ASP, and it showed a 10-kilometre buffer in sort of restricting burning in Air Zone 3 where that burning might impact on air quality in air zone 1. So it gets a bit complicated because the restrictions would apply in air zone 3, but it's to manage effects on air zone 1, which is those kind of really sensitive kind of air catchment areas. The 10-kilometre, the line was drawn at 10 kilometres on the map because that was some advice that we were given from our external scientists. It is something that we could explore for maybe the future. We understand that it's something that's going to create a lot of noise, because if people can't burn in the winter months, then you're kind of pushing them into the shoulder seasons because you can't burn in the summer. So it is complicated. We appreciate that, and it's something that would have to be approached quite carefully. And who says the buffer's 10? Maybe we could get away with something else, or maybe it's something we just park for now. Think about think about later on. So we're actually already for in terms of managing the effects in air zone 1, we're already proposing something quite big in terms of these wood burner phase out rules. So maybe that's something let's do that first and see how we get on. Maybe push that as a consideration for the future.
Thanks for that. For me, it's quite interesting that burn loss or air quality is the second most rung and thing on the environment pollution line after water quality issues. So I think it's a good time to stop and have a bit of there'll be some questions, and Gary's got one to lead us off.
Thanks. Yeah, I suppose when it comes to the buffer zone one and also the notification one, as I understand it, the notification situation works quite well, and it's done purely so that you're not upsetting the fire services constantly when people see burning. And I suppose it is the intent that notifying council would also be only for that purpose. It wouldn't be for council to be able to say, no, not today. It would be just so that there's an understanding that pollution stuff or whatever. I think community potentially would be accepting of that.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that answers that question. The buffer zone one really worries me because the key part of burning is that the conditions are right, so you burn. And if burning has to become something that is either restricted under a buffer zone or not available at all under a buffer zone, which will create some real heat, to use a pun, amongst the community, because there won't be basically alternative options for when it comes to land clearance and trees and tidying up, whatever. But if you're going to restrict so that buffer zones would say it can only be either in spring or early winter or at a certain time, then you're going to condense all of that burning to days when it may not suit to burn, but you're going to have to burn because you're in this tighter window. And so you're going to get a lesser burn. It's not going to work as effectively. You'll likely be back trying to do it again. It is just going to create more challenges than the benefits. And I think also too, when it comes to like high country burning and the real fears that sit around that, for a lot of farmers and for big areas sprayed, you might put helicopters on standby. You're going to you'll do other things that actually create some impedance around burning on the most appropriate day. You're going to burn because all of these other pressures are sitting around you, and you will get a lesser preference or outcome if you burn. So in my mind, especially around the buffer zone situation, the real fear for me is that we create too many outward pressures on the actual activity. That means it's done at the wrong times.
Did you want to?
And my question around that is, I am hoping that isn't the intent.
No, I think there are sort of a number of ways you can turn the dials on what you do in the buffer zones. Now, what we've heard is that in those winter months, the key reasons for burning are the bigger land clearance burns, and they're burning for diseased material for horticulturalists, because that kind of has to be done when the material's found and chopped off. And it might be that those kinds of burns are permitted in the winter period, but other kinds of burns are restricted or need a consent of some kind. So there's a number, and then you've also got the dial of, all right, well, what is the time period that restriction applies for? So is it's not just a case of a sort of on-off.
Yeah, I guess the types of things that James is talking about is the types of things that we would be looking to think about at a later date potentially. And I think, look, we had a workshop with a bunch of outdoor burning stakeholders a few months ago, and it was clear from that there are quite a few opportunities similar to the burner situation, where there are interfaces that we could use to change some behaviours and like get everyone up to a certain level, which, you know, again, like maybe that's the stuff that we focus on in the short term. And then, you know, if we've still got a problem in 10 years, then we potentially look at some more stringent measures. So I guess it's just, again, it's, yeah, you know, there's the interface with the fire service, that with the, offence, sorry, what's that? And there's some quite interesting stuff that they're interested in exploring with us about what they can and can't do, maybe to support what we're looking for. Yeah, and just around, particularly around even like some of the prohibited materials at the moment, you know, they go to look for a fire permit, and, you know, there might be ties and stuff there, and from a sort of technical point of view, they're not, you know, that's not within their mandate, but obviously that's the kind of thing that we would prefer if they can kind of be looking at for us. So yeah, again, you know, I think there's a few activities that we can do to explore a bit better, to just get some better practices in that area first.
Cool.
Sorry, just because I just want the table to be clear in me as well. So we're recommending at the moment that we don't explore buffer zones immediately, but it is a tool we could use in the future. I just think we've got to be really clear.
The strategy as written is based on a full new air plan that would consider things like buffer zones. Perhaps very soon or immediately after lunch, we're going to talk about how we might adapt that strategy if we were not going to push forward with a full new plan currently. We were just going to look at a plan change and just focus on the domestic heating, in which case the strategy would be tweaked to be clear that things like buffer zones were a future consideration.
Thanks, Lou.
Also, I've got, sorry, just why even have them at all then?
The other regions have used them, it's worked quite well. I think it's another tool in the box that we could use at a later date. The strategy doesn't say we have to do them, it would just say, you know, something we might consider in the future, or we could take it out altogether if we just think it's far enough in the future that we don't even need to talk about it yet. We want to just get on with this other stuff first.
With respect though, isn't constantly comparing us to other regions and like putting up a lovely looking photo of Rotorua and saying let's just all be like that, or try and get to that. Does that really apply to us?
Sorry.
You really are a very different region with very different needs.
The reason for doing it where we started with it is basically those that ambient air quality in those priority 1 towns. These buffer zones would be around the priority 1 towns, and it's because we know that smoke can travel quite a long way and it can have an effect on the ambient air. As we've discussed at previous workshops, the exact extent of that effect is kind of hard to measure. We just know that there can be effect. And I'm reminded that I completely neglected to introduce the team sitting in the bleachers over here, who has done a lot of the specialist work, and I wonder
I was just going to say to you, James, I don't, I mean, I'm not chairing this meeting, but I don't know if we need I think the point we're trying to make is that we came to you with this idea of buffer zones. We listened to the ESP committee. We spoke to stakeholders. We did some more research. We've unpacked that it's quite difficult. It's very complex for all the reasons that you've articulated. So it's something that we don't want to rush into. Yeah, so we have listened and we've responded, and we've said that maybe we think about it in the future, but not right now.
That's good summary of that one. Thanks. Sorry, I've got a question from Andrew and Gretchen and Kevin.
It's a comment first and
You
a
can
question.
have
That's
a
right.
comment. Andrew.
Fire permit processes, I've been through that with my son a couple of times with FENS in recent years, and we were required to contact DCC, ORC, put signs up in the main road, i.e. control burn, that sort of thing. So that's the process that we get through. I just want to ask a question about the extension to the air zone boundaries, air zone 2 boundaries. And just looking at the maps, it looks like that the additional area has been on the, generally speaking, on the southern side. So question is, what method did you use to base the increase? Was it looking for a 50-metre buffer on the southern side simply because
No.
the predominant wind is a sou'wester and
I believe, I think that's, it was based on elevation.
Okay.
Those buffer zones were based on
Particular areas on two boundary.
The inversion.
yeah, so if you take, I just looked at Waikawati, for example, sort of my home patch, just on the southern side, you've just extended, the rural area, 50+ metre boundary extension, and the same with Oamaru, same with a lot of the coastal towns. And I just wanted to understand the criteria behind the extension. Where did you target?
Oh,
And if
yes.
it's based on,
No, sorry, I misunderstood. I
That's
thought
cool.
we were still talking about buffer zones.
oh, sorry.
The air zones, that's based on some district council areas which are designated for future development.
Okay.
Largely, so it's based on the district council maps.
It's based on where we anticipate there's going to be a high density of housing. Yeah, I think when you look at the Queenstown map, that's not true for every area. Look at the Queenstown map and it's taken in a bit of a hill. But we had a workshop with ASP, we brought up some maps and we said, does this look about right? And we got a bit of guidance on where it should be, but it's predominantly based on current or predicted future increase in density housing.
Thank you for that. Waikawati's on the move.
Thank you, Gretchen.
Probably shouldn't enter into buffer zone. It's quite tempting though. Yeah, it's a lot simpler if we focus on domestic heating, get that. Yeah, worried that if we invest, and I agree with it, but if we do invest a whole lot, and we've talked at length about what that would cost to do that for individuals in urban areas, but we know that on the fringes of those towns, we have got impacts that can spread into those towns. And then we invest a lot in domestic wood burner upgrades, but actually it still doesn't get there. But I think that time to adjust, because I think there is it is something that needs worked on. It may not be in a regulatory approach at the moment. And I am listening to you saying that actually other regions have found a lot of success in dealing with that buffer zone. I think there are things that could change over time. I agree, we need to deal with dead wood that's diseased from orchards, etc., from vineyards, and we need to deal with it at the right time. But there's ways of dealing with it that can alter over time as well. Already in some townships that I know of in Otago, they don't want smoky areas around the urban centre or around the peri-urban. So somebody gathers up all the green wood, puts it on their farm and burns it at a right time. And there are solutions that people adapt to over time, because actually communities don't want smoky areas. So, I mean, hey, I know there's a lot of scenarios where it would be difficult as well, but I think there would be a way of dealing with some of that stuff. So just want to add to that I think we still need to be working in that area too. Chipping, having hot fires, making sure it's done well. Just need, it's not a walking away from that issue. Thanks.
Thanks, Gretchen. Kevin?
Is our intent to improve behaviours in areas that may affect air zone ones? So should we simply not be saying, as opposed to putting a buffer zone, which has got that connotation of here's a straight out restriction, is that the intent of the strategies improve behaviours in areas that may affect.
Yeah, that's what Fleur articulated.
Yeah. So rather than having that buffer zone, and then a buffer zone is clearly, it could be an option in 10 years' time, because no one in that area has actually done anything. They're still a bunch of plonkers and we need to sort them out, sort of thing. Yeah.
I think, Kevin, you've just articulated what, and I think to Gary's point, I think it is important to flag within the strategy what could be a mechanism in the future. If the approaches being taken now are not successful, because that's transparent with the community to say, look, behaviour change is a good way to go. However, if it's not working, there are other tools in the toolbox in the future that could be introduced through a plan change or whatever it needs to be, and being transparent about that's important. But I think what you just outlined is what I heard in terms of what the approach would be. Subject to that discussion after lunch around the scope of the potential plan change.
And just to be clear as well, it's as much about educating urban communities about what rural burning needs to happen and why. And so that's part of that puzzle as well. So just to be clear.
Yeah, that was the piece around notification, isn't it? Yeah.
I think I'll probably move on. Just one comment from myself. I know something that I get talked to about a lot when you see the big plumes of smoke coming out of rural fires. So there are issues, and we have to recognise there are issues, and we have to. This is my opinion. We actually have to do what you're doing, is talk to all the stakeholders, all the people involved, and create some attitude change. Yeah. So I think that's your first step, which is a good, and as you're saying, we got the backup that you can use in need be. But I think there is a real need to up the education side of it and get some people to take ownership of some of those issues. So I think we got another three to go before lunch.
Lord, I just had a question on the zones. Just a quick. Is there any air zone 2s that you feel actually should be air zone 1s, or are we comfortable where we're at?
Milton and Mossgiel should be air zone 1.
Yeah, which is sorry, you've got them listed there to go, but there's nothing else you believe.
Not at this point.
Yeah, comfortable. Thank you.
The strategy does articulate that we want to do some better monitoring in some places, and that might tell us a different story, but based on the current data, we're quite happy that those 6 are the ones we need to target.
Thank you.
So focus on. I'll just quickly rip through this last slide, and then that could be a good opportunity for a break, and we can come back and talk about plan versus plan change. So the strategy talks about focus area 5 being the sorts of activities that we usually often have permitted activity rules for or require consent. And all we think that we need to do in that space is just update some of the rules to just make them clearer, bring them in line with best practice and planning standards and things. So if we were good to do a full plan, we would take the opportunity just to tweak some of those rules and just update them a bit. Focus area 6 is around vehicle emissions, so it's a completely non-regulatory approach. So whether or not we go with a full plan or a plan change, we would crack on and do focus area 6 anyway, because it's all non-regulatory. So that is really around, it's largely around better understanding the issue and raising some awareness as well. And other things that we're already doing a lot of really well, which is, promoting public and active transport. We could also look at things like better regional transport planning, and look at things like a media campaign. But the main one I think that would be interest a lot of people would be doing a bit more NO2 monitoring in Dunedin. I think that's something people would like to see. And then focus area 7, again, non-regulatory, would like to get on and do this anyway, and kind of already doing it, which is expanding our ambient air quality monitoring network. And we could look at reorganizing the way that we do some of the monitoring, but we'll talk about that later in this session. So focus areas 6 and 7, I think we should get on and do that anyway. It's non-regulatory, it's we should just do.
So, Andrew?
On the screen under focus area 5, it says update the rules. On your paper that you've circulated, it says they're updating rules to meet best practice and incorporate some additional activities. So incorporate additional activities. What?
That was about contaminants, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's a couple of particularly permitted activity rules that are currently in the trade and industrial area that need to be updated to be a bit more rigorous, or at least we would do if we were updating that area. So yeah, there are a couple of tweaks that we would make to the regime that's there at the moment, although largely we think it does the job it's there for.
So the additional, potential additional activities are you focused on a national direction rather than anything else? Is that what you're saying?
I think so. I might just ask Tanith, are you able to provide any update on that?
Yeah, it's more around looking at the permitted activity threshold levels for certain discharges to air of hazardous air contaminants. And looking to see whether those levels remain appropriate for a permitted activity level.
It would just be useful just to have a little bit more, I don't know, flesh on the bones from a governance perspective, just to understand where we're heading with that.
Sure.
Thank you.
It's good. Do we have any other questions? The last three are quite self-explanatory to that. I think it's been a really good session, so thanks very much for that. Now it's time to stop for lunch. Shall we go? Yeah. Half an hour, 20 to 1. We'll reconvene. Thank you very much. Kia ora North, welcome back. We just started and we're recording. So we'll just continue from where, Simon, welcome to the top table there.
Thank you.
Good to see you again. There was a couple of questions that will probably come out in a minute, but we'll just start moving to the second part. We're starting to look at our, how we approach moving this project forward. So we'll just let Fer, looks like Fer's going to run the ship here now. So we're in capable hands. Yeah. So we're all good. So thanks, Fer.
Right, thanks everyone. So I'm going to take you through the next few slides. They kind of cover two interrelated matters that we want your feedback on. So what I was just going to suggest is that I'll cover the slides as a block first, and then we can come back to things if we need to, if that's all right, and flip back and forth as we need. So this one here is about, since we came to you in March, as you're all aware, the government's announced that the RN reform program is coming, and some timeframes associated with that, including what the future planning system will look like once those bills are in force. So the government's indicated it wants to get the new system in place with a swift transition. We're not exactly sure yet what that means or the detail of how the transition will occur, but we can make some predictions based on what we do know. In the first instance, it seems that the existing provisions will be what they're calling lifted and shifted into the new system, rather than going through a review and updating process. So we'll effectively have what I'm calling a stapled together plan that has the regional plans together as one chapter and the district plans as individual chapters, with a spatial plan sitting over the top of them both. It has been signalled that any plan changes or plans notified under the RMA will be allowed to continue under the old system rather than be paused or whatever. So that has been the signal to date. So that's one thing. The second is that there's an expectation that the regional spatial plan chapter will be completed prior to any work to update the environmental planning chapters for the regional plan. So there's an idea that that will happen first. Third, it's going to take some time to establish the new national direction instruments and the regional spatial plan chapter. So I'm picking there's going to be a period of time before we'll be able to update those, what they're calling the lifted and shifted environment chapter provisions. So given that we know the planning framework will change, we've had a good look at what we were doing to develop the full air plan. And now we're probably heading towards recommending that you consider an alternative regulatory approach, just to take that into account. So that approach would be to focus on a plan change, which has been kind of, we've been talking around it a few times today, but to focus on a plan change to address only the most pressing issue in Otago and the one that contributes the most to poor air quality around domestic heating. So then other regulatory changes, which we've also signalled, could then be made at a later date under the new system rather than the old system. So I've been desperately trying to find out whether there's an intention to update the NES-AQ provisions as was previously consulted on in 2020, and haven't been able to get an answer yet, but I feel like in some ways that's a bit of a signal that it's not exactly high on their priority list to update the NES-AQ provisions. But as Hilary mentioned, we're pretty confident that the actions in the strategy to address home heating would be similar for addressing PM 2.5. And so we think that this is a no regrets approach to dealing with it. You might be thinking, why change the regulatory approach at all? Let's wait till we've got a new system and do it all at once. And you can, of course, choose to do that if you wish. But our advice is that we think there's a high chance that the new rules wouldn't be in place in time to support the actions in the strategy. And the success of the strategy is highly dependent on the proposed phase out rules being in place with plenty of time for people to actually be making decisions. Right. Press the click. Yeah. So that's that one. So this is the new slide that James alluded to that you won't have seen yet, and contains the advantages and disadvantages and some key risks of the two regulatory approaches. The text is quite small, so I'll kind of take you through it, and hopefully that will get us there. So in terms of a focused plan change, the pros there are around that it targets the key air quality issue for Otago. It's got a strong evidential backing and community support already. It's a significantly leaner and cheaper process. We don't need to rewrite the material around the provisions, so like the introduction and all the other stuff that comes part of a plan. It's not just cheaper for council as well, it's also for submitters, and the hearing process will be cheaper and shorter. It does allow a simpler engagement process and earlier notification, and I'll explain the proposed engagement process in a minute, so we'll be able to talk through that. And finally, it maintains the current familiar rule framework. So from a drafting point of view, it's a lot simpler, not having to put it into the new national planning standards framework. Some of the disadvantages of a focused plan change is that it will result in a delay in addressing some of the other air quality issues, so including some settings that are out of date and potentially harmful. And it delays giving full effect to the RPS because it doesn't cover all activities or discharges to air and updating that framework. Finally, couple of the risks there is that we don't know what the new legislation or national direction might be, and it might be more stringent or it might be less stringent than the existing framework. And so that may therefore require changes to be revisited. And yeah, just that public and stakeholders have kind of been told that we are doing an air plan, and they might not support that we're kind of doing something different now. Moving to the other side of the table there around a full new air plan. So the advantages there around having one process for all air quality issues, so it won't be split into kind of a before and after new legislation. Fully updates an old plan that we haven't substantively reviewed since we put in place right across all topics. I mean, they're kind of two sides of the same coin, so I feel like, but just to make the points, in terms of disadvantages, it's significantly more resource intensive, both for council and submitters. And as I said before, it kind of requires a full rewrite to implement the national planning standards. And at this point, we're not sure that those standards are going to survive the RM reform. Well, it's hard to know at this point. The timeframes there are longer, probably nearly 6 months longer. And I think importantly that some of the additional topics may detract from or delay the home heating rules becoming operative. It could actually detract from what we're trying to achieve with home heating. Finally, the risks there is a risk that the government may prevent notification of new plans at a particular time, and that might be before new plans are ready. The new plan is ready for notification, which means that it's almost the worst of all worlds. We'll be stuck with the current rules for some indefinite amount of time, which we can't say what that is. And then again, a risk of that approach would be the perception of continuing when we know that there's a new system coming. So that's kind of the new slide, and we can come back to any of those as we go through. I don't know why I can't do it. Cool.
If you look at the slide, it's the fact that your cost benefit analysis. If you deal with the biggest issue, you're going to get you're almost going to get it through with very little conjecture. While you've got it's leaner and cheaper, it's actually return you get on that cost is much greater if you only do that. And I think that's the sort of language we need to be speaking in, because that's what the government will like, that you're paring it down rather than having something that's unnecessarily going to have a whole lot of conjecture. You've got something that most people agree with anyway, makes common sense. Yeah, I just think you need to
we can definitely reflect that.
think more in the language that
Yeah,
this government's
yeah.
talking about and costs. Yeah.
That's good. Okay, I think Gary's got a question.
Yeah, would both options sit with the risk of government not supporting because of the signalled changes?
Yes, I do think that's a risk, and I would, if council decides to go ahead with, actually probably with either, I'd be wanting to begin some discussions with MFE staff, at least at my level, about sort of how that, I guess, whether that would be supported or not, so that I could inform you of that when it's time to make the decision.
So the third option that potentially should be up there and might come right out of the blue is not proceeding until we have the RM reform and direction. from central government.
Status quo.
Yes.
There's always an option.
Yeah.
Which is that we just hold the current plan.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the advice that we provide in, well, either July or August, we can include that third option if that's useful. And reflect the language as Kate suggested. So
Good. Thanks.
that's good.
And for Tim's question.
You've got there simple engagement process and earlier notification for the plan. What sort of timing are we talking about here?
We get to that.
We're going to get there?
You read my mind, that's what's coming next. So the next few slides talk about a bit more about our approach to further engagement on the strategy and plan, and how it affects the timeframes and next steps. So we've worked with the engagement team and taken some lessons from the recent engagement OSC's done, as well as discussing with the council reference group to think about how best to deliver some meaningful engagement on the strategy. So the proposed approach that we've got here is to focus on an online survey with a video and targeted engagement with community groups and stakeholders. These would be types of groups like residents associations and active community groups, especially those in the 6 priority towns. So the original plan, and I don't want to use the word plan, I mean with a small p, was for a full new air plan, as you know, and bring the draft strategy with the plan approach to you in August for endorsement. We then have the public engagement in October, November, at least in part to avoid the election period, with a decision on notification in April 2026. So that's actually kind of set out there, and I think you've got that in your slide pack with the timeframes. So the new plan that we would like council to consider in light of the RM reform coming is to proceed with a plan change for the home heating rules. So we bring the draft strategy tweak to reflect this change, if that's where we're going, to the July council meeting for endorsement rather than August. And then we'd seek to be doing the public engagement in August, which makes some sense because it's in winter when people are actually thinking and seeing the issues. We'd then be able to come back with a decision on notification probably in December or February. So that's on that slide there, which I think you will have seen already. So I'm not sure if that's answered your question, Tim, or if you had wanted a bit more on any of it.
So so December 25, February 26 is where we would end up with having gone through the process of plan change.
That would be when we would have done the pre-notification consultation. So after we've done the public engagement process, then we've got some pre-notification consultation that we are required to do. So then that would be when council would make a decision about whether to notify a plan change.
Okay, yeah.
Thanks for, Kevin's got a question.
It's probably to Richard. Richard, I'm just wondering about consultation, public engagement in August, September period. While it is in, or August certainly is in the winter, but with election, and is that not in a tricky pre-election period?
No, we did have quite a lengthy discussion about that, and we're comfortable as Plan B is set up, we would have to hit those timeframes.
Yeah.
If it dragged into September towards the end of October, then no.
Yeah.
August, okay.
Right.
In terms of where we're at in the process, and the strategy itself, so.
Thank you.
It would be different if we were talking plan consultation.
Yeah. Thank you. Good.
Alan?
So, the plan change proposal, your suggestion here, is that only around the home heating?
Yes.
James had mentioned some earlier in the morning, some other changes on those other focus areas about outdoor building and whatnot, updating some of those outdated rules, but leave that, just
Yeah, no,
home
we
heating.
would leave those and just focus on home heating, because that's where we're really
Yeah.
gonna get the big gains.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So, so first, just for home heating in Air Zone 1, or is Air Zone 2?
Basically, focus area 1 and focus area 2 is described in the strategy. So the focus area 1, it's those phase out rules commencing 2030, and also requiring that any new wood burner installed as a ULEB, and then that provision would also apply in Air Zone 2.
Thank you. Kevin?
Yeah, and I assume that won't preclude any non-regulatory things that we're talking about, improving practices and more education and all that sort of stuff. So that will go hand in hand to reinforce that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
One other thing that would need to be in the plan change would just be those tweaks to Air Zone 1, Air Zone 2 boundaries.
So basically so the Plan B is pretty much Plan A, not formalised. The first years.
We had this conversation yesterday about, I wish we hadn't called it Plan B. Yeah, the original Plan A, and now here's Plan B, because we can pivot.
Elliot?
Just around the engagement and conservation, so for August, if we do go ahead with the plan B, we're looking at engaging on the strategy rather than the plan, but the plan is still described within the strategy, and the strategy still relies on the plan being adopted at a later stage.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, the strategy, it will be tweaked a little to kind of, because I think at the moment it does allude to some things that might happen in a plan that might happen a bit later on. But yeah, in general, the consult or the engagement is on the strategy, which includes stuff about what the regulatory support that those actions need. Yeah.
So we are sort of in going out for that engaging on the potential plan change as well.
Yeah, it won't be like a draft plan change for people to look at, but in terms of what the rule, like the content or the approach taken in the rules is what we would be consulting on. Yeah.
But then once we actually notify that proposed plan change, we'd need to go out and do that before.
Yeah, so they would go through the whole usual RMA planning process. Yeah.
Yeah, we just need the strategy to describe the plan change in sufficient detail that anyone could pick it up and understand how is this going to affect me.
It's good to have any more questions. I think they're ready to continue on.
The next what you shared. I might just, before we do that, just ask to Simon and see if I got anything wrong that he needs to correct, which I feel can do very
Well, I didn't actually think you did get anything wrong. I guess probably, yeah. An important point is that you're at the stage right now where you have the option of considering a plan change instead of a full plan review. And as you pointed out, there's also the status quo option. And at the present point in time, it's open to you to consider that there is major legislative change on the horizon. Whereas once you've started a Schedule 1 process, you just have to apply the law as it stands. So now, as the Fleur and others have put in front of you, now is the time to be having that consideration. But probably the other thing to note is that I think Fleur's right that the NESAQ is not top priority on the legislative reform agenda. In the expert advisory group report, the NESAQ came in for specific criticism as to being poorly drafted. And relevant to the next topic, airsheds, there is specific reference that there'll be some quite prescriptive criteria as to how you delineate airsheds. And it sounds as though standards may well be either imposed from on high, including in relation to air, or there are fairly strict criteria as to how standards get set, so that the government's clearly looking for a level of consistency across the whole country, and that includes air quality. Because air quality is a topic which is very much driven by data and science, and when you're talking about air quality and the impact of home heating, well, data depends on how much you've got, but the science is pretty clear. I think you can have, as has just been suggested, a pretty high level of confidence that addressing home heating specifically, which is an area where there is a lot of, is plenty of data and good scientific advice, is in fact a no regrets approach that is heading in the direction you would expect to be getting. When you start getting into other areas, you're getting closer and closer to a lottery as to whether you're going in the same direction as future legislation will require or not. So I probably could have just answered. I agree with everything Fleur said, but there's some more comments.
Thanks, Simon. Tom?
If we were to proceed with a plan change and we establish standards that were higher than what then came out in a new RMA or a new national standard, would we could keep those? I presume we can prescribe higher standards than what we in those documents. Is that correct?
We don't know that yet. It depends on what the future legislation and perhaps national direction says.
Yeah. So what sort of, I mean, I think we've been sort of told that the RMA is likely to be out end of this year sometime. What sort of time games are we going to get if we race off with a plan change before an RMA is available for us? It's only going to be months, isn't it?
You expect it to be longer than months because the timing is to introduce bills to Parliament by the end of this year, and for those to become law by mid-2026. And at that point, there will be transitional arrangements. It's been signalled that regional plans, such as Air Plan, I forget the jargon, but will effectively be a transitional plan under the new regime. And generally, when you've got a new regime which requires a new planning framework, the time at which you have new plans that reflect new legislative direction is not instant. There's a period of time for that to happen. So whether that's 1 year, 2 years, we've got no idea. All we know is that it's mid-2026 is the soonest we'll have some law, and that there will be a transitional regime where whatever our current air plan is continues to have effect.
Gary, and then Kimmy.
So, given the extent of what the government is signaling like this isn't just tweaks to the RMA. They're basically saying the act is either being replaced or turned right on its head. So then is there like these processes are long and protracted, but they're quite onerous to our community because they have to engage with us. They have to, this one might not be as bad as in the award space where you're adding professionals to your submissions, but still, this requires community engagement. So do we reach a point where because of these signal changes, we almost have a moral obligation to not bring the community into these processes until we've got certainty around what they are going to be considering?
Yeah, I don't know. I think my view on that is that a narrow approach that deals with a known issue is okay on the basis that the plan that will be required under the new framework will clearly deal with air quality issues, and particularly in these environments where we've got data where we know it is a problem. So I think, again, I don't have all the information. I'm not the expert. Would have serious reservations with the current reform in front of us to go ahead with the entire thing. I think I would like to take some more advice, and I think the conversation Fleur would have with MFE would be very relevant for that. I don't think it is too onerous to take the narrow view where we know there are issues and issues and they've been well known for years, and we have the data and the evidence to back that up. And we know that there is a fix or a mechanism available that will make a big difference, that we could go ahead with that with confidence that any new planning framework that the government introduces will still allow or will still encompass air quality and actions that would improve air quality. So I'd be relatively comfortable operating in that space.
Can I just ask a further question for that then? It's just that as we look at the options with this, and even with the narrowed option around domestic heating, this all comes at a cost to our community. The outcome of this is going to mean, over a time frame, changes and costs. And yet we have quite a short window to wait and see to what the government will bring out. So, we could be talking about some quite detailed discussions about how, some big numbers could potentially be made available to assist with buying new burners and subsidising installations. It just seems we're jumping the gun.
Yeah, I don't know, Fleur might add to this, and Simon may be able to as well. I think and the example you gave around water versus air, I think is quite relevant. I think there is less contention in this area. And I think regardless of where the government goes, this is an area that will fit under whatever framework they come up with. And I think as a council responsible in this space under the current regulations, it's prudent for you to consider whether you go ahead with this, because it's something that we know the data tells us we need. I'm not saying your point's wrong. I think they're very valid, and they're the things that the table's got to weigh up. But I think if you look at the age of our current plan, the evidence we've got, what we know we can make a difference, and then you look at what we do know about the new RM framework and the way that will be set up, we are not doing something that is going to be completely removed from what the new system requires a regional council to do anyway. That's my feeling based on everything I know.
Just sorry on that though.
Just flesh that out a bit, and then.
No, that's okay.
I'll just.
All I was just going to say is, we will be coming to you in July for council to have that discussion. And even if you decide to go ahead with consulting with this on the strategy with this in mind, the actual decision won't be until December or February, in which time we'll actually have a lot more information. So even going ahead now doesn't mean you're locked in until it's not until you actually make the decision to notify that you're in the Schedule 1 process. So I guess it's not, you're not getting locked in. That's probably my point.
Just the point that Fleur made, the timing that's on the board, December, February 25, 26, which is the time for the notification decision, is the same timing as when we expect to have legislation in front of Parliament. And at that point in time, we have a pretty high level of comfort as to which direction things are heading. And if there's a surprise in that, which suggests that notifying plan change on this discrete point is not a good idea, then you'd expect the advice to be not to notify.
Thank you. I've got Kevin, Alexa, Peg.
No, I'm comfortable with that explanation. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin, Alexa.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with this next steps. I just want to remind everyone that there's up in the headwaters, people get very antsy around August, September when spring comes with the burn-offs. And there's been quite a lot of pressure. A lot of people have really wanted to see this air plan redone and are angry that we've taken so long to get to it all. So we're going to have to, if we go this way, to carefully manage that expectation and communicate that. There is a number of people that are waiting for their chance to slam people that are burning outdoors and ruining the view in September, October, and August as well. But anyway, so it seems like a reasonable thing to do. It seems ridiculous to have a go at a full plan change under the current circumstances as you've outlined. But I do think that there will be a bit of resistance.
Thanks, Alexa. Tim?
With the land and water plan, we had some sort of threat around legal action if we weren't to notify that. I mean, that was the advice that we had, and also the threat of a judicial review. If we were not to notify, not to proceed with any of this and just leave it as status quo, is there a legal risk that we might be facing?
Short answer, yes. The 10-year review of the air plan has been overdue for more than 10 years. And that's not uncommon, by the way. It's very common for that 10-year deadline to roll past and review not have occurred. So it is possible that somebody could take action based on that. Whether that would be successful or not is not as simple as the deadline's expired, therefore you must do it. And as to whether anybody would think it's a good idea to do that, I don't know. I can't think of an instance where it's happened, but there's always a first.
Thank you, Kate.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk to Gary's point, which I totally appreciate, but I think against this, people change wood burners they probably change cars 4 times in the life of a wood burner, and it's that cost of putting in the wrong wood burner, which can have difficult effects. I mean, what my mother-in-law uses, we put in 25 years ago. It's still working very, very well. It's well maintained, but yeah, they are quite substantial, and it's not just putting the wood burner in. There are a whole lot of structural stuff that goes if you change them. So I think, which we have to be cognizant of. So when you're balancing that stuff up, I think you have to think in an area of rapid growth, both in Arrowtown and Queenstown Lakes and Cromwell, areas where you've got these concerns, you've got huge growth that the potential is that it's going to be huge costs in changing that at a shorter term. So that's where I think I didn't want to just look at the cost side. It's the poor investment that you may be putting on people otherwise. And that's that balancing that I think we should be really cognizant of in that decision process and balance.
Hilary, if you want.
Just wanted to touch on a couple of things, just to clarify. So, Tim, you talked about us bringing in new standards and how those standards might be different. We're not proposing to bring in new standards. The plan change would be phasing out older wood burners, not setting different air quality limits.
Yeah, that's what I mean, though. That would be the standard, bringing in new wood.
And I just wanted to kind of bring us back to why we're doing this in the first place, because we're talking a lot about trying to meet the standards. We know all standards, new standards. The standards indicate what in the minimum air quality standards should be for optimizing human health. So, human health is the outcome that we're actually chasing here. It's not ensuring compliance with the standards. And, back when we had a strategy in 2007, the ambition of that strategy was improving the health of Otago residents and enhancing resident and visitor wellbeing. So, it's not new that we want to improve human health outcomes for residents in these towns. And, just trying to helicopter up and remember why we're doing this in the first place, appreciate the complexities of the current regulatory environment. But, if we proceed with a plan change, there could be a risk that the laws change. But if we decide to do nothing at all, then the risk is that we're pushing out improving health and outcomes for residents. Because without those phase out rules in the strategy, like we say, if you're going to take that tool out of the box, then you have to rely more heavily on the other tools. That could become very expensive. I would have less confidence in the strategy achieving the outcomes that we want, which is human health outcomes.
So we've got Ellen and Andrew.
Thank you. I think I might just be adding to what Hilary said. I certainly understand about the risks of doing a whole new plan and understand that may not be wise. But in terms of costs, yes, taking action will take costs, but let's remember there's also costs in not taking action. Just those costs tend to fall somewhere else, like on our health system and on individuals get sick and on families who have sick children. And so where we have identified there's a problem that affects human health and that we can do something about it in our position as a council, then I think we have a moral obligation to take that action. So I hope that we can move forward with this. And I know the plan is only part of that action, but it's an important part to have amongst those other things in strategy.
Thanks, Andrew.
With regards to any plan change, I would much prefer any commentary around an engagement plan clearly indicated that we wouldn't notify a plan until the new RMA legislation had been enacted. Because I think that's a really important message. I know we're not at that decision or anything, but if we've got information floating around, I'd like to think that that would be our position based on the most recent history with plan changes.
So Andrew.
So it's more of a comment than a.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, Simon, have you got any points to make as to when some sort of an idea when that time frame may be?
Yeah, I think what I was referring to before was the timing is the indicated timing to have a bill before Parliament. And I think the point for me anyway is that that's the point in time when we would have a very clear indication of where the legislation is headed so far as air quality is concerned. So it was that point in time, in my comment anyway, rather than the point in time when the legislation actually becomes law, where the target is mid-26. But whether that's achieved or not, I don't know.
I guess at the end of the day, that becomes a decision also of the council prior to notifying.
I think the key thing is that we can provide you some very good advice on what the legislation is telling us, but also whether we can get any information around how going ahead at this time would be perceived by government and government officials.
Am I right in assuming the worst place we will be in once that information comes down from government is that we've done some good consultation. We've gone out with a strategy that's that we've approved and said let's go out and get that consulted on and prepared a plan change that we may or may not enact. And then if the news is not correct, we would then stop then, but we haven't lost that consultation. We haven't had we haven't lost the education stuff about good practices and the likes.
Yeah, no, that's correct. And I think that, you know, through the strategy, we could make it clear that we intend to, as an organisation, that we see that there is a need to phase out older wood burners. And so at least it's sending the signal to communities that it's coming at some point. It might not come before the new RMA, but we will want to bring it in with the new RMA. But you know, we're saying clearly signaling to these communities that at some point we will have to phase out older wood burners if we want to achieve these health outcomes.
And just for myself, I think in some ways we've also got an obligation to send some clear signals out there of where the expectations probably lie into the future. So we don't want, like what Kate was saying, we don't want people putting in a whole lot of fires right now that we probably already know are going to be non-compliant into the future. So we need to actually get the people the opportunity to put in, you know, the futuristic fire or the fire of the future, or what the expectation is. And from what I can see, if we go down the short plan change, exactly like everybody's saying, we're actually going for the low fruit, probably the best bang for our buck. But it also enables us to kick off that education program as well, the education and the program that goes with the strategy. Because if we just stop now, we sort of like end up in this ring. So we carry on. We're going to kick up all that, carry on and take our communications and dry woods and this and that and the next thing to, you know, ramp it up over time. So everybody's going to be at the ready. We're going to be at the ready to be able to make the decision, you know, at, you know, come notification time, that we can make that decision based on the political landscape at that time. But it's important for me that we make sure that everybody understands where our thoughts are heading. And it's important that we also get the thoughts of our general public as what they're thinking as well, so that we can say that we've got that conversation going. Do we have any other questions around the proposed Plan B and timeframes? No, it's all good. So we go on to the air sheds.
Oh, maybe. Oh, sorry.
All right. Yeah, just moving on to air sheds now. So there's a few things to note regarding the gazetted air sheds. The first thing, I guess, is that they're different from air zones. The air zones sit within the air plan, and they're those areas where the rules apply. The air sheds are a gazetted air shed under the NESAC, and the requirement under the NESAC section 15 is that if there is likely to be a breach of a PM10 exceedance, that's the yearly breach in a air shed, that air shed must be monitored. So we do monitoring in air sheds currently, and what we're looking at the moment is whether we can improve the arrangement of our air sheds, both in terms of the grouping of the air sheds and their boundaries. So we think that we can align the air shed boundaries with the air zone boundaries. And we are currently investigating how different groupings would play out in terms of monitoring and in terms of NESAC compliance as well. And yes, one thing that we need to do prior to Gazette would be to include any suggested amendments to the air sheds in that public consultation. That's a requirement of the Gazette process. So we would be needing to have some form of consultation alongside the strategy for that. And the other thing I'll note is that the proposed regional policy statement does require us to re-gazette our air sheds within a particular timeframe. So that's another consideration.
So Amber, you're saying you're looking to align the air sheds to the air zones, or is it more align the air zones to the air sheds? Which one takes precedent?
Well, that's regarding the boundaries. So we did quite a lot of work on updating these boundaries for the air plan, and we spoke to you about that in a workshop earlier in the year. That was to do with adjusting the boundaries for urban growth, future development. So we would be taking, the current airsheds are quite large. When they were drawn up around 2005, they were actually based on water catchment areas. So we would take, the current airsheds are quite large. We would reduce most of them in size to the air zone size, which better encaptures the urban, residential, commercial, industrial areas. And those would be the areas for the monitoring.
So that would form part of the any plan change.
Part of the re-gazette.
Yeah, the gazette is a separate process to the plan change. All we were trying to signal today is that we are that where the air sheds lie doesn't really affect what rules apply to different people. So it's not really something that people on the ground are going to even notice. It's more applies to how we do our monitoring. And so we're looking at whether and how we would tidy up our air sheds to make them tighter. It just makes more sense. But you know, as part of the gazette process, you have to do some public engagement. So we thought, well, we're going to go and do some public engagement soon. Why not try and do both at the same time? So we might come back to you in July with a paper that says we'd like to notify on, do public engagement on the strategy. We'd also like to throw in there the fact that we're doing the gazelle, which is going to affect our monitoring, but we haven't figured out exactly yet whether we would do that now or whether that would be something for later on anyway. But we're just signaling that it might appear in that paper in July.
Thank you.
Yeah, so are we comfortable that your thoughts on the air sheds actually aligns with those boundaries? So like the definition of an air shed, all those new boundaries, I'll just put the honorary one here on page 34. So that air shed will align with that boundary. You're comfortable that that will meet the definition required under the Act?
Yes, so short answer, yes.
Yeah.
But the air zones and the air sheds are in fact two different things.
Appreciate that. Yep.
But it's unhelpful that if there's a reference to, I think it was Omru you mentioned, in the air plan, it means this area, and the air shed means that area.
Yeah.
When in reality they're trying to talk about the same thing. So making sure the boundaries are the same is just a common sense.
Thank you. Good.
I'm just trying to understand a bit more about the air sheds. So it sounds as though air sheds don't cover every part of the country. Is that, they're just places where, or they do?
Strictly speaking, they do, because the starting point is that every region is an air shed in its totality, and then regional councils, or in fact the minister of it, his or her own volition, can gazette or can effectively subdivide it. And generally that would relate to an area where, as Amber's said, there's some air quality monitoring required, or one of the obligations in NESAQ has been triggered.
Okay, so we monitor in some of those air sheds where we think there might be a problem, and that's the requirement under the current NESAQ, which might change, of course. No. Okay, good. In just adding to this, in Dunedin, for example, is Dunedin composed of one air shed, or is that divided up? Because we know there's valleys and all sorts of different things. How does that work?
It is currently divided into a number of air sheds.
Okay, which could be helpful, but yes, the role of air sheds is still a little hazy to me anyway. Okay, thanks.
It shouldn't be, because they should be clean.
So for that, I always thought this led not all air zone, like the metropolitan, the need not air zone 2.
Yes, so for the purposes of the plan, Dunedin as a whole is Air Zone 2 and is under those Air Zone 2 rules. The current gazelle of the Dunedin area is in a number of different air sheds. However, it's only the central Dunedin air shed that's currently monitored.
You're right.
Just exploring what an air shed is just a bit more. I think I sort of know the difference, but how are they set? We have to gazette them, but do they kind of work like catchments? I mean, how does it work?
Kind of. One of the reasons NESAQ has been criticised is that it uses the concept of an airshed but provides precisely zero guidance as to what an airshed should be. And broadly, there are two factors that should go into it. One is the things like the meteorological conditions, geography, and things like that, which tell you whether, where, and how far air and how fast air is going to move. So it's kind of like a catchment, but it's not the same because air is not constrained by the banks of a river or landforms. The other is management of air quality in areas, so treating them as effectively management units. And to make that even more complicated, an airshed can comprise, does not have to be one contiguous area. It can comprise an area here, an area here, an area here, and that is how Otago has delineated its airsheds back in 2004, 2005, or whenever it was. And those geographically distinct areas are treated as being together in the same airshed for a number of reasons. One is that they have similar air quality issues or status, or at least they did in 2005. And that's how you come to have different parts of Dunedin in different airsheds. But there are also some consequences which arise under the NESAQ depending on how you group your airsheds. And one relates to monitoring, which is if within an airshed you have, or it's likely that there's going to be a breach of standards, that triggers a monitoring obligation. So and that applies on a per airshed basis. So if you have lots of separate and distinct airsheds rather than grouping them together, you end up with far more in the way of monitoring obligations. Another is the concept of a polluted airshed, where if you have a large airshed or an airshed that comprises lots of areas, if one of them meets the threshold to be considered polluted, the whole airshed is treated as polluted. And balancing those considerations along with the desirability of the areas we're talking about being consistent with the language and geographic areas that are in the air plan makes for quite a good puzzle that thankfully is being done at that end of the table rather than this. And so I expect that what will come back to you is a reasonably firm proposal that this is where the boundaries will be and these are the reasons why. So sorry for the long answer to a short question, but
well, it's given me a supplementary. and hopefully it's good. I don't know, but it's so if we took off down path plan B, so the path of just making a plan change to look at home heating, would we have to redo air sheds as part of that?
Not in the sense that it's absolutely mandatory, you have no choice, but all of the reasons that have been described why it's desirable to do it would still apply.
Thank you.
Or Andrew, then Kevin.
Hypothetical question. From a legal perspective, when land is encumbered by an air zone, because we're proposing to change quite a number of air zones throughout Otago, and let's say ORC owns some land that is then, through this process, is encumbered by an air zone, what do those landowners need to be aware of? Obviously, the obvious one is if you breach air quality standards, you're in trouble, whatever. are there any other things that a landowner would need to be aware of in that situation?
In the present context, if we're talking about proposed plan change option, they'll need to be aware of the changes that are proposed, which affect Air Zone 1 if they're in Air Zone 1, or Air Zone 2 if that's the zone. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the phase out is for Air Zone 1. And the changes proposed for Air Zone 2, I can't remember, sorry.
Any new installations?
Yeah, new installations in Air Zone 2 having to be ULEBs.
Oh, LED, sorry.
Futuristic fireplace.
And can I just add to that, under section 17 of the current NESAC, consents within polluted airsheds are subject to more stringent requirement. So there is that aspect that the landowner would need to be aware of as well.
I don't own any land in these proposed areas, just to make that clear.
Yeah, probably the only, after all this talk, the only thing that confuses me actually now is Dunedin. Because if you have some air sheds in Dunedin that are pretty yuck, but the whole area we're saying is Air Zone 2, that doesn't come under our fire changes until the next period, does it? You're only doing that on Air Zone 1's the first priority, but we have some bad air on our airshed zones in Dunedin. Am I right there?
Yep, the monitoring for Dunedin indicates that the air quality issues in Dunedin aren't as bad as those 6 priority towns.
Oh, okay, right.
So why we're prioritising those towns.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so we're not, because of the shape, because it's all in 2, there isn't, we're not missing it. That's okay. Good. Thank you.
You've either got a southwester or a northeaster, so.
So that's, I've got a clean board at the minute. So
in the stadium.
we're coming to a natural close, I think. So I think there's been some pretty clear direction come through from the table today to go back and keep Flo busy and the team and Hurry and co. And busy for the next month or so. So I see the next steps from here is for you guys to take what you've heard today and come and bring a paper to council in July would be the target, and then take it from there. Okay. Awesome. So just on closing, thanks very much. Been pretty good discussions. I wrote a couple things down from the beginning for trying to work out why we're here, but with the air plans, basically what I can see the plan of the strategy is to know what we've got first of all. Know what we want to achieve, and then how we go about bridging the gap, and we're using education, funding, time, and the last line of defence is basically the regulatory line. I think in this afternoon's discussion, we decided to narrow it down to concentrate on the lowest fruit and the high value fruit and get that underway. And in doing that, we're going to have a follow off. We're going to have a drop off effect into the other areas anyway, as we create some more awareness around air quality across all of Otago and the desire to make sure that we have air quality for future, basically. Across everybody, so everybody plays their part. So I think that's been a really good session. So thank you very much. And I'd like to thank all the people over in the far corner, remaining pretty quiet most of the day, but it's really good that you're here and sort of being part and hearing the discussions as well, because at the end of the day, you're the, that's probably where most of the work's being done. So, thanks very much for coming along and listening in, and all the people who may watch this on video later. Thank you very much. So I'll just close the day. I think we're finished for the day, so I'll just close the day with a karakia, kia tau, te rangi Māori ai, ki ronga ina iwi o te ao.